What a way to go live.
Christian
I love it.
celebrating.
Oh, welcome everyone. Welcome to the first live version of Writer Real Talk here on the Musical Theater Writer Guy channel. Today we are talking with the writers and creators of the brilliant One Woman musical, My 80-Year-Old Boyfriend. Charissa Bertels, Christian Duhamel, and Ed Bell. Hi,
Hi.
welcome friends. It's so lovely to
Hi.
see you all.
Oh,
Yeah, thanks for having us.
yeah, it's good to reconnect. Good to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I met Ed and Christian first, but I've seen Charissa a lot more recently, actually, in your lovely short surprise turn in an Axmas story in December. Our viewers will remember that that was written by our BMI friends, Patrick Spencer, Anthony DeAngelis, and Charlie O'Leary, and we did an interview with them like a year and a half ago, which was really, really lovely. But as we get going here, I'd love to just start with taking a quick spin around. If you would just introduce yourself, let us know where you're calling in from, because we've got a lot of time zones today.
Yeah.
Um, and how you identify as a creative and what you do on this musical project. So, Charissa, let's start with you.
Hey friends, I'm Charissa Bertels, and I apologize, I'm a bass today. Had bronchitis all week, so I'm just thrilled to have a voice. But anyway, bass Charissa Bertels coming to you live from Manhattan, Kansas, which is where I'm from. So I'm here over spring break, kind of hanging out with my family and going to my nephew's spring break play today. So it's been a great week. So that's where I'm calling in from. And on our show, I am the conceiver and performer. So this musical is based on real life events that happened to me in New York City. And so it's been really fun to get to share those crazy stories with our audiences. And thanks to Ed and Christian, they've crafted it into a beautiful piece. But yeah, I think in life as an artist, I consider myself kind of primarily a performer, but I've started to dip my toes into that writer and creator universe, and it's really fun. New York's are my passion, so I'm always like, please, please, please give me something new.
I love it. Thank you. And thank you for conceiving of the project and putting it into the world. I mean, new work is obviously what I live for, but I think it's kind of the lifeblood of the theater. So thank you for that. Ed, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, so my name's Ed Bell. I am calling from Barcelona today, which is where I live. But I'm originally from the UK. You might be able to tell from my accent. And as an artist, that's a really good question. I identify as a writer and musician, the kind of broadest definition of all of that. And yeah, on this project, I am the composer, and with Christian, the co-lyricist.
Lovely. Thank you. Barcelona. So yeah, we're really reaching
Yeah.
across. And now for the full effect of how far we are away from each other, Christian, how about you?
Yes, my name is Christian Demel. I am in Seattle, Washington, on the other coast, the other coast in this instance. And I think these days, as a creative I identify still as a multi-hyphenate theater artist, one of those. And mostly these days, that looks like book writing and literal book writing, libretto writing, and being both a lyricist and composer. And on this particular project, I am the book writer, and as Ed mentioned, we're co-lyricists on the piece.
Like, yeah. Oh, I love that. Book writing, as in like book writing. So
Book, yeah.
I was not aware of that. I knew, Ed, you've written a book, right?
Yeah, I've written a
Cool.
few different books.
Any-
Yeah, so I'm
A
an
few.
author as well.
My God, multiple authors on this call. I love that. Um, Goodness. And for our viewers at home, just throwing it out there, because Christian won't say. Christian is also the winner of the 2018 Cleban Award in libretto writing. So just, throwing that
Yeah.
little nugget into the mix as
Yeah,
well.
we try to hold on to that because we're like, it was for this piece. So
Right, right. So Charissa and I did not win the award at all, but we
That's
feel
right,
like
but-
we bask in the glow of
Right,
the
exactly.
award
By proxy.
that was given to Christian for his work, that we were next to him while he did, essentially.
It's all the collaboration, isn't
Yeah,
it?
the wealth
Exactly.
gets shared. Well, maybe the wealth didn't get shared.
I was going to say, like, let's be clear
Creative
on one
wealth
thing.
gets shared.
My
The creative
check.
wealth, yeah.
Here's my check.
Yeah.
I love it. So I've known you all for, we just discovered a decade,
Yeah.
which is
10
fun.
years, hooray.
Yeah.
And this show has been around for quite some time in development, in the writing process, and in productions. And so just a quick question of why we're having this conversation now. What are you all currently up to that I'm going to drop a link about?
We're making an album.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're super stoked. We've had 4 regional productions now, and we unfortunately had a thwarted off-Broadway run, thanks COVID and all the craziness
Yeah.
ensuing from that. But we're still hopeful that that will happen. But we thought, one thing that is in our control is making an album. So let's get out there and do it. So we're hopeful that that'll also drum up some more exciting opportunities for the show itself. But at least it'll be preserved. Like we're so proud of our work. We really are happy that it'll be preserved for all time for people to check out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a campaign going right now, right? For raising some funds.
Yeah.
I will be dropping a link to that. It's already in the description, but I'll drop a link afterwards and pin that for everybody as
Thank
well.
you.
So you
Yeah,
can
it's going
donate.
great. I think including Venmo and some personal checks and things that people have sent us, I think we're over the 70% mark for our goal, which is amazing. Yay! And we're trying to we have $1,000 match this week. So if anybody hears this broadcast and wants to help us, we're only about $200 off from making that match this week. So that's exciting. So it's going to get us a lot closer. And we still have 2 weeks left of the campaign. So we're going to make it. We're going to make it.
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful. A $200 match. Y'all, just click the link. Do it now. It's in the description. Just $200? That's nothing. Let's do it.
Exactly.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, so this musical is a special musical. What a great story. I love this story. To be fair, I've only seen it once, and it was quite some time ago. My goodness, quite some time ago. But I know that it's had quite a journey. Would you mind walking us through how this all began? What was this initial seed of an idea, and how did this collaboration come together to write it?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you want to kick off, Charissa? I feel like
Yeah,
you're
and then I'll
the
pass
the
it
like the
on.
beginning.
Yeah, so basically, when I moved to New York, as actors, we all have these like crappy actor side jobs, and mine for a while was like catering and being a personal assistant and all these things. But the weirdest one was demoing drinks in a grocery store, and I always called it monkey juice because it had a monkey for the logo. And I would go to these grocery stores and just set up for like 4 hours and try to convince people to buy this drink, right? And one day it was like a November cold, rainy, blustery day. Nobody wants to try this cold drink. It's going to be terrible all day. And I was like, wow, this is going to be a long shift. And finally, this little old man walks up and we started talking about poetry, German lieder, art songs. Shakespeare. It was crazy. And I was like, what's happening? We're in a grocery store. This does not make any sense. And at the end of it, he was like, oh, I'm so sorry to stand here boring you like this. And I was like, no. I was bored before. This is great. And he was like, okay, well, I should probably go home, but I live across the street in the East Tower. Would you want to come over when you get off of work and have coffee or something? And I was like, okay. I was like, all right. So he hands me this card, and I still have it to this day. It's in my New York apartment, but it's like a business card from like 1960, and it's got his full name and his phone number and all this stuff. So he hands me this thing. And he's like, okay, here's my apartment number or whatever. And I was like, okay, great. So I go over after I get off of work, and I call my husband. I'm like, hey, here's where I'm going. He's really old, so I'm not very worried. I'm pretty sure I could break him, and I was like, but this is where I'll be. And he's like, okay, have fun. And I went over, and we just sat around for like 3 hours talking about literature and poetry and life. And we were just wonderful friends, like from that moment on. So fast forward, I'm making my Broadway debut in A Christmas Story, which is like magical. It's my Broadway debut. It's a new musical. It's Christmas time in New York. Like, what could be better, right? It's amazing. Everything's going great. Well, of course, I lose track of my wonderful 80-year-old boyfriend because I'm so busy, right? And I tried to call him around Christmas and I couldn't get a hold of him. And I thought, oh no, I've gotten so wrapped up in my own stuff, and nobody would know to tell me if he had died, because who knows that we're friends, you know? And so I was like, and anyway, I had this like real life moment where I thought I had lost him, and I thought I had missed my opportunity to tell him how much he meant to me, and it just really shocked me into like a reality of like, oh, what's really important in life, you know? And I was like, this is it. People, like, right, connecting with people and love, and telling people that you love that you love them while you have a chance, because we don't know how much time we have, whether we're 80 or not, right? And so I was like, wow, that's really powerful. And I had always wanted to do a one-woman show, but I didn't want to do it until I felt like I had something different to say. Because everyone comes from a small town and goes to New York and wants to be on Broadway, right? Like that's not a very unique story. It's a cool story, but it's not very unique. And but this happened, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's what I want to share with the world, right? Like that's what's important. That's a message I want to give to an audience every night. And at the time, I really didn't consider myself a writer or a creator of any kind. And I was like, well, my best friend, Christian Mel, happens to be a fantastically talented writer. So I was like, if I can just twist his arm to do this with me, it'll be great. So Christian, take it away.
Yeah, so at that point, it's such a good story. It's good to hear it's good to hear the origin story again. It's interesting because, as Charissa mentioned, she had done A Christmas Story on Broadway. We had done a bunch of shows together in the Seattle area, developing new works with New York writers often. And so, you know, when she came to me, I was like, you have this whole cache of people that you've worked with, these creative teams. And she was like, no, I want you to write it. You're the person. I was like, well, let's do it then. You know, we used to have these action plans, and it had sat on an action plan for quite some time. And I was like, are you going to do that project or not? And so when she approached me about writing the show, I had lived it with her. I felt so close to my best friend and this friendship that she had developed with this wonderful man. And so I knew I didn't want to do all the parts, which I might be capable of doing, but it just didn't seem like a good idea since I was so close to her, so close to this story. And so at the time where Michael, Ed, and I met at the BMI Music Theater Workshop, I had never collaborated with Ed, but I had heard his material just in some of the assignments, and in thinking about what I thought the vibe of the show would be and what the sound palette might be, he seemed like he would be a good fit. So I told Charissa a little bit about him. I was like, he's British, so, you know, very charming. That accent does half the work. It's all good.
Oh, that's how I got picked for this.
Yeah. It was
that's how I got asked. Just so we're clear.
Accent. Yeah.
Just so we're clear.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And we were talking about this the other day. Ed and I went, and like
we've sort of been friends for a while, because you're right, like so people know about the BMI program. You get like paired up. Everyone's there as a composer or lyricist, and you get paired up and you get to practice collaborating with different people. And so we were never officially paired up in that way, but we definitely sort of become friends and admired the work each other was doing.
Yeah,
in the workshop.
We'd like gone for drinks in New York. Maybe we went and saw that Marcy and Zena show.
Oh yeah, we went to see Marcy and Zena.
Yeah, down at
54 below. Yeah, that was
like just random things, you know. We're like, hey, I have an extra ticket, or things like that.
Yeah, because sorry, I'm just interrupting now. But like side thing, with someone else in the BMI program, I've been to like, I forget what it's called. It's like Broadway trivia. Is that still a thing? I'd been to that with someone else from BMI, and basically our team won. I didn't know anyone else there that night. It was another friend from BMI at the time, and we won. So we got like a voucher to spend at 54 Below, and I'd done a Marcy and Zena show in London. I did the premiere. I music directed the premiere of Dear Edwina, their show, in London, and was like, oh, it'd be really cool to see them live. And then I was like, oh, well, who might I invite to that? I wonder if Christian is free. So that's a total side note, but that's basically how that happened.
I love that.
Yeah, so that was a good show.
Yeah.
Just to celebrate other great musical theater writers.
Yeah.
So I introduced Ed to Charissa, and I have to admit, I don't know where that initial meeting took place. That's what I was just trying to think about. But it was just we all sort of like the vibe.
I think we went around to Chris. The first time was in the first time you mentioned the show, we hung out in Dallas Barbecue in Washington Heights, and we just had a dinner or something like that. I can't remember. Just talk about it, just a kind of pre-vibe check.
My face.
That was it. And then I think we were just like, okay, well, maybe let's just hang out Carissa sometime. The like epicenter of new musical theater in West Harlem, Charissa Bertels' house. And just kind of chatted from there, I think, as far as I remember. And then I don't even know who spotted it, but somebody had this thing about this emerging artist theater opportunity, right? Where there's a theater in somewhere in Midtown that would put on like works in progress. And we had what, 4 weeks, 3 weeks to put everything together?
EAT does a festival, and you like submit, you don't even have to have any material. You can just say, we will have this time length of material. Here's the general vibe. Will you give us some time and space to do it as a part of your festival? It's an amazing, amazing organization. What they do for creatives, I think, is really beautiful. So we submitted. We had nothing written, zero written.
And 3 weeks to provide it.
Yeah, and we told them that we would come up with 45 minutes of material.
We love a deadline, y'all. We love
artists need a deadline. So we got accepted into that, and then we were like, oh shit, we need to write a show. And so we
did
3 weeks, and we wrote this. Because we've been doing the cast album, we've been revisiting cut songs from the show, and one of our favorites is both the opening to that original EAT presentation, which was like like literally it started at the dawn of time. It talked about God creating the world. We had to get the audience from God creating the world all the way
to being right here in the theater,
New York City. Like
we rewrote this opening several times.
Yeah, the opening that's there now, but really it was just like, you need something. So what do we got? We got this. Great, put it down, keep going. And Charissa, we recorded Charissa just talking about Robert, and talking about him, and really just getting her archive of stories into some form. And sort of,
it was kind of like a chorus line. It was just like they just recorded these stories for hours and hours and hours, and then that very first reading that was 40-45 minutes, it was really kind of my words verbatim, and then Christian started to take that and shape it into art. You know what I mean? Like in the beginning it was more like verbatim theater, and then it was like, and then he crafted it and made it something really special. So that was very cool to see that transition.
Yeah,
because it's kind of like when it. Sorry, no, I was going to say it's just kind of like when, in a way, it makes things easier to have like very specific subject matter, and to have the subject of the subject matter there to tell us about it. But you kind of going from that like this enormous like trove of material of all the things that have happened in real life, and it's like, well, like that show is like 12 hours long. Like every single detail, every story of Charissa with Robert, the real name of the 8-year-old boyfriend, is like Wagner's Ring. It is like 4-5 different evenings of show, which obviously we knew we didn't want to do that. So it's like, how do you take the best of that and craft it into a satisfying evening? And so even kind of early on, that was a question, but we sort of didn't really answer that in the first version of the show. That was this like, and also it was more, one of the things we started out, kind of the conversations we had really early on is like, how much did we want this to be like a cabaret? How much did we want this to be like, the actress in New York doing the cabaret of different shows? Wasn't there a version of the show, Charissa, that you penned with like existing songs, like a kind of jukebox version of this early on? I don't know how serious that was. I thought that was
I might have like created like a playlist, or like, I don't remember.
There was like a vibe that was like, because there was a world, one of our very earliest, and what EAT really helped us do was to say, it's not that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It is a show that can be lit. It was really the question. I usually call a first version of that, like Baby's First Sonogram, right? Like, is
Yeah,
there a show here? Let's do it in a really safe environment. Because if there's not a show, this is a good time to be like,
to
oh,
find
not a
out.
show. It's something else.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so that was the question of that time. And part of what Ed and I set out to do was like give Charissa the show that ticked all the boxes that like the New York City actress wants. Like, well, I want to tap dance because I can tap. So is there a tap number we can throw into my cabaret? And like, I play a piano. Is there like a piano? Like, we
Yeah.
just created this sort of list of things that if Charissa was doing that version, that is beautiful. And I've seen so many of those by wonderful artists, mainly in New York City. If she were to do that, do the songs that we write and does the way that we tell the show actually tick all the boxes of that? And that became a good sort of banks of the river for our creativity. If it wasn't doing that, like we just started to let it go. But yeah, Eat was the place where we saw that there is a show here. There is a message to the show that's worth sharing with other people. And in fact, of all the material, well, Ed will remember best what stayed in from Eat because he has a brain
Right.
like
I seem to have a brain that just remembers these things. Nobody knows why, but that seems to be
I mean,
one
I
of my
did them, and I don't
responsibilities.
remember them at all. My
Well,
brain
it's
is like
crazy. It's
flush,
crazy though, because like
flush.
with the book and stuff, my memory is not good for that. Like I remember the songs and at which stage they were in and out. Maybe it's just that's why I'm a musician. I don't know. They're like the composing this. I don't know. But like lines in the dialogue, sometimes I'm like, I remember that joke. Is that still in the show or did that get cut? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah,
But
now
yeah,
we have
what was kind of crazy about the EAT reading is like a lot of stuff was cut. A lot of stuff did not survive. But like actually 2 or 3 songs kind of just sailed through and we changed lots of little things. But I was going to say for me, and I don't know about these guys, but the big thing about doing the EAT kind of presentation was I think we were all like, oh, this, even in this kind of rough, like outline format, people are really responding to this. People are like as moved by this story as we are, and like, oh, this is maybe worth spending the next 3 years developing into a full piece, you know,
yeah, and
which is
people
obviously,
people loved him, right? It
yeah,
was like, oh, this is gold because people fall in love with a person they never see.
yeah,
They never see him, but they fall in love with him every time. And that's really astounding. So you're just
Oh
like,
yeah.
wow, if that's something we can give people and that they can see their own version of Robert Milton in the show is a character name, but if they can like really put themselves in that, then like everybody has an experience, like whatever that is for them. And that's really cool to get to witness, like when they come
Yeah.
along on that journey with us. It's fun.
Yeah, I think that's part of the magic of the show is we've never met him. We're never going to meet him. And yet, like, you are completely enraptured. You are totally in
right.
love. Also, I had completely forgotten until this conversation, y'all, that I actually have seen the show twice. I did see that first Eat performance because
You did?
Oh,
I was 2 days later in the same festival with King's
oh
Legacy.
that's
yeah, I
right.
remember that.
Hey,
I
Which,
do remember that.
I tell that story all the time of rewriting half the book and a third the score in 3 weeks.
yeah.
But
Right.
you wrote from 0 to 45 minutes in 3 weeks. That's so impressive. My goodness.
It was wild.
So
It was wild.
yeah,
But we were,
yeah,
but that response was what made us go, oh, we can make a full length show out of this. And then we were really
yeah,
challenging, like the guys, they really challenged themselves to be like, what can we do with one woman that happens in every book musical, but would be completely
yeah.
insane in a one-person show? And they wrote a book musical that just happens to only have one person and a piano player. Like, it was really cool. So that I think that was a fun challenge for them because it was like, oh wow, well, can you write a duet for one person? Can you? You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, can you have a whole opening number with one like what does that look like? So,
I'd
that's
love
really
to dive into that a little bit, actually, if that's all right, because I know
Yeah,
that
sure.
a lot of people in my audience have floated the ideas, whether from the performance side or the writer side, of writing a one-person musical. And this is a question I get a lot, is how do you still make it a book musical? How does that
Right.
actually function? I know that you had said here that there was so much information of the stories with Robert and that you were parsing through to find the story. Can you talk me through that process a little bit, what that looked like?
Yeah, well, Christian should speak more about, or maybe Christian and Charissa should speak more about like the plotting and things like that. But my sense of being involved in that, but slightly not responsible for that as a composer lyricist, is that from like, in terms of like the actual plotting, it's not that different from a musical with 20 people. And all I mean by that is like, we knew early on that again, there's this like treasure trove of material, but the challenge was always going to be, how do we craft that into a great like 80, 90, 100-minute evening of like what is going to be a journey that this audience is going to want to sit through. And again, these guys might want to speak a bit more on that. But in terms of the like it was kind of what Charissa was saying, right? When it's like, I remember early on having this like thought or this conversation about like in your like traditional book musical, the opening number, you bring the whole cast in, you set the world of the show. And then maybe the next song or the song after is the I Want song, the character establishment song, and that's the lead person, and you focus on them and what they want. And we were like, the entire cast is the lead character. Like that is the same, the entire ensemble and the lead is the same person. So what does that mean? But I think really in terms of like the kind of texture, the like kind of nuts and bolts that make up the show, it really was like Charissa said, of like what is a thing we can try that is a different like format or combination or angle. And so, because Charissa mentioned she with Milton, the HO boyfriend in the show, she actually does this duet. It's kind of an old school. It's a bit like in Family Guy when they do the like, there's just a random song that sounds like it's from the 20s or the 30s, and that's what this is. So it's kind of a like Germany sort of that thing. It's called Together With You, and yeah, we have Charissa and Milton do this sort of like song and dance together. So that was a moment with that. There's a couple of places where Milton sings kind of through Charissa. There's the tap dance that Christian mentioned. So it really was like the show has really evolved from being that cabaret, that New York artist cabaret, just in itself, to being like a full book musical. But we tried to keep those elements of like, what can we show off Charissa as an actress? She's also a character in the show, obviously, but what can we show Charissa do as a performer? And again, that's the tap dancing, that's the playing the piano in one of the songs, singing as herself, singing as Milton, playing all these different characters, but also like musically, stylistically, like we have the super like contemporary musical theater sound, the kind of poppy musical theater sound. We have this sort of like old school 20s, 30s classic musical theater sound in places, and like everything in between. So it was like, I think for Christian as well as co-lyricist, but certainly as composer, like a really interesting challenge to be like, oh, we can like borrow this and we can like lean on this, and without it sounding just like a random potpourri of like random sounds with no kind of sense to them. I think, yeah, one of the fun things about the show is this kind of a bit of music in there for everyone, whatever kind of musical theater you're into.
Yeah. Christian, do you want to speak to the story crafting side of it?
Yeah, I think structurally what's so interesting about a one-person show that's a musical is I think you're looking, things that we had to look at just period as a team were like, what is this person's relationship to the audience? And really, until we were clear about that, the beginning of the show just kept meandering.
Right.
Because the goal of the beginning of the show, one of the many of those first moments, is to say, hey, I'm up here and I'm this, and you're out there and you're that. And I need to make that clear, because maybe you're supposed to be like a silent, viewer of my experience, and maybe you're my ally, and maybe you're my opponent, right? Like getting that really clear. And it might have been even, well, I know it was after we brought our director on, and he, Sean Daniels, amazing director, drama desk from The Lion. If you saw that piece, brilliant. He said one day, I just think that when it feels like I'm in Charissa's kitchen and she's invited me over and we're hanging out at the kitchen table and she's telling me this story, that's when I feel most at home in the show. And at least from a book writer perspective, that was the arc. And eventually it took several versions, maybe as many as Fiddler, to get to the opening that's actually really gentle. It's very soft. She comes out, she literally takes in the stage, takes in the audience and then says, picture me, like says, come along with me. So it took a long time to get there though, but that is the thing that helped solidify and anchor what the top of the show was about. And then the next big question, particularly structurally about the beginning, was how fast can we get to the inciting incident and Milton? Because Carissa's brilliant. She's very captivating on stage. Yes. But until we like meet Milton, we're kind of going, who's the 80-year-old boyfriend? What's going on here? And part of what we learned in the early readings and being out with production was like the audience is restless until they meet him. They're like, I came because the title kind of like maybe stirred something in me. We'll talk about where it stirred something later, but stirred something in them, a curiosity. And until we could get them to that, they weren't actually going to listen to much. Right. So we went from having this like very Sondheimian opening number that was very New York paced, very busy, taking us through all of the stress. It was like 7 minutes or 7.5 minutes. Whoa. And now I think there's this like less than 2 minute gentle intro from Charissa, like, hey, I'm Charissa, I'm safe, you're in good hands, you're an audience member who are my best friends, welcome, into like a 2.5 minute typical opening number. Like it takes place at Monkey Juice, where she said, and she's selling juice. And you can see, if this was a big, full larger cast, because it is a full cast of one, if it was a larger cast musical, they would all come out selling juice in this way. It's just that she's one person. So I actually think one of the lessons, to get to your question after many anecdotes, is like the more that we stopped thinking of it as a one-person musical at that stage and just wrote a good, well-structured, impactful musical. That's what I mean by good in this moment. A well-structured, impactful musical. That was the best thing to do. And then after that, we could answer all these questions of what's her stamina? What's the audience's stamina? We need a break. How can it feel like we've heard other people sing, even though she's the only person we're going to hear sing all night? But I would say for the people who might be considering writing a one-person show, just start by writing the show. Write all the characters. If it's like 40 characters and you're like, but it's a one-person show, great, write the 40-person version of it. You'll figure the next part out.
Right, because that's really smart, because that was just made me think back to when we did the first EAT version, and that really was in Cabaret World, like that original opening number, which I don't think any of us took particularly seriously at the time anyway, but we put it together. But that was in the world of like, hey, welcome to my cabaret. What was it? Take some time, make some time for me, and I'll make time for you. So it was this kind of like, it was a bit like the opening of Pippin, where they're like, this is the world of this, come in and we'll do that. That was the kind of model. And we just learned that was not it, but we had to like write that wrong version, multiple wrong versions, because it's worth pointing out as well, for the original, so the kind of big Sondheimian opening that Christian is talking about is the version we did the first full production of the show with when we were at the Merrimack Repertory Theatre in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it worked, and it kind of did what we wanted to do, but we also found that the audience, as Christian said, was just like restless. It was a lot, especially for like an out of New York audience. It was like, wow, like all this information coming at them, and we just like knew that they didn't settle in, and as Christian said, until What Of You, which is the kind of the next big song, which is when we meet the 8-year-old boyfriend, and that gets established. And so after that first production, before the second production, we had some kind of big questions about, how do we get into the show? And that, it makes me think of that old adage that like, how you open the show is the hardest thing to get right, but once you've got it right, like, I'm not going to say you're off to the races, because there's other things going on. And as Christian said, there were other things we had to like, Christian particularly had to like tweak in terms of pacing and, and pace and things like that. But yeah, it was the classic thing as well of like the simpler, once we'd found the simplest version of the opening we could find, that was the one that seems to have the most impact and effect.
I want to highlight a couple things in that, and thank you for the anecdotes. I love the anecdotes, and Nick also said he loves the anecdotes here on YouTube, so keep them coming. A couple of things. Yeah, the opening of any show is the hardest part. I mean, the old BMI adage is, of course, write your opening last, and then rewrite it, rewrite till you figure it out. And then. Yeah, I mean, it's hard in any show, but especially with a one-person show. I think the two things that jumped out to me, having written a one-person show as well, is how do you get the audience to trust you immediately, and then also clarify what their role is to you as the performer, both for yourself and for them, and that is tricky. That's a hard thing to do.
Well, and they're afraid too, because a lot of people, they don't want to interact. Like they come to a show and they're like, oh, please don't pick on me. You know what I mean? Like I really don't want to break that fourth wall. And you know, so it's kind of a delicate dance to figure out like how much you're going to come across that fourth wall or not, you know what I mean? And how uncomfortable you're going to make them, or how can you avoid that and make them comfortable instead of uncomfortable, you know? So that again, they can, because I mean, you would just hear men crying in the audience, you know what I mean? And you're like, well, they can't do that if they don't feel comfortable, right? So like, so it was like, well, we have to set up the story so that they can feel relaxed, and then they really do get hit with that impactful surprise, you know, right? And the way that they are shocked at how much they have fallen in love with him, and how it really affects them when they think he's gone. So yeah, I think that's really a tricky balance. And I, as a performer, I really had to work hard to find that too. And a lot of that you can only find from experimentation, right? Like Sean would be like, well, tonight it took a little longer, or you were like a little too hot at the top, you know what I mean? Like if you're too aggressive, or you're too, you know, too much, then they're just like, right? As opposed to, again, that easy, we're in my kitchen and I'm just going to tell you this crazy story that happened to me. Like, do you want to come along? And they're like, yeah, I do, right? As opposed to, look at this, right? So like as a performer, you get so nervous, right? Because you're like, well, I really have to impress them too, right? Like they have to be impressed, like, you know, because if they don't think I'm good, like then they don't want to stick around for another 90 minutes, right? But it's really not that at all. It's like people, that's not what they're looking for. You know, like they're looking to connect, and they're like, it's not about if you have a perfect voice or perfect what, you know what I mean? Like it's about, can you let go of those things and just like, I always tell my students, it's like that Care Bear heart, right? It's like that Care Bear stare. Like, can you let the Care Bear stare out, right? Because if you can open that up and let people see it, like they're just like, because that's a special thing, right? To show somebody. And if they can see something that they feel like they're not supposed to see before it closes up again, like that's magic, right? So that's what I had to learn, is to be like, okay, let go of all of the armor and all of the things that you do to like impress people or be good or whatever, and just really just focus on telling that story, because that's what's going to hook them in, not your talent, not your voice, not your whatever, right?
Right. Vulnerability and connection. I mean, it's a large part of why we go to the theater at all, is to feel human and to connect as humans. And I just want to highlight the brilliance of the opening, to have you walk out and take in everything, including the audience, before you begin. I don't know whose idea that was here, but like, wow, that is
big Christians.
It was all of ours idea. We had it collectively at the same moment.
That was, I was going to say, that was specifically what Christian won the Kleban for. Literally that line, just to be clear. That was it. I don't know.
But that is even as a writer, that's such a vulnerable idea to write down on paper. Is the performer walks out on stage, takes everything in, so we're in silence, I assume.
There's like a little like underscoring.
Yeah, there's a little and that was part of it too. Charissa at one point was like, I kind of want to like see the person behind the piano that I'm about to spend this next chunk of time with, like just a moment for us on stage to be like, I'm good, you good? Okay, we're good. Yeah. And like originally there was a version where Charissa went up to the piano and like played the top note of a run, you know, like, hey, we're in this together. Like, I got you, you got me. So we kind of knew the vibe, but we kept whittling away until it was right.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
it's making me think of, sorry, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one of the unique things about a one-person show is like you're really equipped to create that intimacy.
Yeah.
It's something that large shows have to work really hard for because there's so many people. And how do you create that connection if you're going to even have direct address from your large cast? But in a one-person show, they know it's me and you, it's me and you. So for us, I think learning the more that we leaned into that, the more successful the show was, the more comfortable Charissa felt. She's like, no, I can really see them now. I can like take time and be with them, which is what I want to do as a performer, connect with my audience, and the audience gets the same.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that like, I guess we kind of implied this, but it's one of those things you can't figure out except by trying. Like, there's no way you can't just sit at home at your writing desk and be like, oh, I guess this will work. Like, it really was a process of and yeah, and being lucky enough to have a second production and being able to come back of like, what did we learn? And like, how do we see things differently? Having not thought about the show so much for a few years, like the first production, we were still kind of developing kind of late on, just in case that's helpful for people, you know, developing their own shows, that it's like, you know, that's the reason you do readings and you do tryouts, or you just, you know, you get 4 friends together to just like perform it one evening and see what, you know, round a table and see what happens.
Yeah.
Because it was making me think of that thing as well, that word they often use in BMI, like the permissions of the show, like how you set up, like, oh, this is where we are and what we are, and you know, as Christian was saying, like the relationship with the audience, and it sounds like when you know, and it's kind of obvious, but again, it was a pretty big, maybe even the biggest journey, the most important journey of the show was like finding that simple solution that's obvious when you know, but took so many goes to like get right.
Yeah, actually, can we spend a little time on development and what that looked like?
Sure.
Because I'm sure, I don't know the extent of all the readings I'm sure you've all done over the years, but I know there's been multiple productions, and I talk to a lot of writers who, when they're coming to me with their shows, like, I just want to get this draft right, and then I'm going to production and it's done. I'm like, hold the phone. There's a lot more that comes along with that. So can you talk to me
like you can, some shows that's the right path, or it is fine. I think so. I seem to be the secretary of all these things, so I'm going to rack my brain for all the things we've done. So I think the first thing we did was like in the EAT production, again, the rough like 40 minutes. I have a feeling that like December or like 6 months after that, we did another rough tryout of a couple of other songs and things that. So I think the space is gone now, but it was a rehearsal space somewhere on like 54th and 8th or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
What was that called?
It was one of, anyway, that was
the Golden Ram. Was that the Golden Ram?
It was the Golden Ram.
I think so. So that was kind of another tryout, but the first full version we did of the show was, I want to say February 2015 or March 2015 at the Frederick Lowe Room. Say again?
It was Valentine's Day.
That's right.
Right. Perfect. That's a good memory. Oh yeah, of course. I remember that. So yeah, it was Valentine's Day of 2015. So we've been working on the show like a year and a bit at that point, and that was the first full version. So yeah, there was like 3 or 4 songs in that were just cut, that never lasted after that. And that was the evening we connected with our first commercial producer for the show. And then after that, we did like a reading workshop in, was 26? No, I'm lying. It was the next year, something like June 2016. We did a reading workshop in Philadelphia because Charissa was on tour at that time. We did another one in October that year. We did one in January the year after that. And then we were in rehearsal for the first production in 2017, I think April, May. I think it was April or May.
So maybe we started in March, but
yeah. So basically we'd done 3 workshops and then the first production with a like 5-6 week rehearsal period when we were still making a lot of changes. So yeah. So and like before that, we'd already done quite a bit of development work as well. So that was that.
and we had time where we went back and changed things. We kind of, after that first run, we had like the opening was a question and a spot that we called the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Because
I was just cruel.
Oh
because
no.
he was just
Right.
me. Yeah, no. I was like, I thought you were my best friend. But like it was a really difficult chunk of the show for me as a performer. Like there were like so many things
Just
about
like technically, right? It was
yeah,
just
just
like,
as like
Well,
stamina,
it's
breathing.
you're at the crunch of, if it were a 3 act structure, you're at that crunch towards the end of act 2. And with multiple characters, you're like, okay, great. They just had their intense scene. Off they go. Bring in the next couple or the next trio. Let them have their complex scene and then send them off. But unfortunately for Charissa, she had to manage all of those because she's all the crunches. So that's where the gauntlet came from. So
Yeah, and then,
structurally, when we look at shows, we're like, oh yeah, we know this moment. We know this
yeah.
moment from our linear book structure musicals or even nonlinear.
Yeah. And then we were like, okay, well, that's really rough on the performer, but it's also it was a little rough on the audience.
Yeah.
Like we felt like they were having to make a hard left turn that they were not ready to make. And they were like, right. And so we were like, okay, how can we make that better? So Christian went back and just did a lot of brilliant work to massage some of that stuff, reorder, some things just to make it a little less taxing and a little more forgiving for the audience to keep on the train with us, instead of grabbing so hard to stay with us. But yeah, so we worked on that, and then we went to Arizona.
Well, and just to say, like, the gift, that first production was at Merrimack Repertory Theater, just to shout them out and thank them for like taking the risk on us. The gift of these audiences is that it's the worst thing as a writer when you see it and you think you've done it and you watch it and it's clear the audience is uncomfortable for a good opening 12 minutes or 10 to 12 minutes and a whole 10-minute chunk 2/3 of the way through your show. And now there's going to be 40 more performances of it where you
and
will
nothing you can do.
and know that you have made your audience uncomfortable for 25 minutes of your show. We're not happy about that over here, people. And so, but the gift is that from that, you can say, well, this was working. These moments were, even within that minutes, here was a moment where I felt things settle or I felt the focus get better. And when Charissa talks about the gauntlet, that's what became. She said we reordered some things. It's like, oh, here are the places where they're falling in line with us very easily. Keep those and adapt from there. So I guess it's my way of just like celebrating the gift that was that first production that MRT really gave to us as creatives. Yeah.
And they're amazing because they've cultivated an audience that accepts new material. Like I think they put on 5 to 6 pieces a year and people subscribe title unknown. Like they're unicorns. Honest to God. I was like, who are these magical people? Because I've never been anywhere like that where everybody's like, yeah, we're excited. We're going to try it. And maybe there'll be like 1 or 2 that aren't really my cup of tea, but like, I'm excited to see something new. And I was just like, you are my people. I love you so much. So that was really a gift. And they were a smart, savvy audience too. So it was like, great. Like they're accustomed to new work and they like really the feedback they're giving us just from being in the audience is gold, If you listen and pay attention, you're like, oh, there it is. Like write those notes down.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Chris, I just want to jump in. You were going to take us to Arizona.
Oh yeah. So then we got really fortunate and our director is also an artistic director and he was hopping, from theater to theater. And so we just lucked out that we got to kind of follow him and he put us on his season a couple of times. And so he was in Arizona and we're like, fantastic, we're going to Arizona. So we went to Arizona and that was kind of during pandemic times. Theater was just starting to come back. And so we felt like, oh, well, this is a perfect show for that because it's about connection, and it's like, we've all been craving that where we've been like so isolated and so, not in contact with humanity and other people. So that was really a special one. And we got to do that in Tucson and Phoenix. So we had a long run there as well. But that's where we really put in that new opening and the new gauntlet. And what else did we change anything else, Christian, Ed?
It was tiny things like there's one song called "My Hate Your Boyfriend," the title song, which originally was this like version where Charissa like awkwardly figures out this label "My Hate Your Boyfriend," and it was fine and it passed time. But at some moment we were like, would this be funnier if she'd sort of decided on this label and then was like teasing other people about it? So that was a kind of, because one of the things with the title, we've gone backwards and forwards over a ton of times, is like people think it is like this intergenerational romance, and it's not. It's a friendship. But in real life, Chris would use this phrase, "my actual boyfriend." So that was kind of where we set that to bed. So there was tons of like tiny little things like that. But it just really was, the luxury of like having one professional production is its own thing, but being able to come back to it and not having to worry about all these little details and just focus. It sounds kind of negative to say focus on the things you didn't quite get right, but it's such a privilege to be able to do that and just be like fine tuning all of those things. Again, that just like, this is why theater takes so long to develop, because there's just so many things you just have to see it. And as Christian said, like we did a lot of like development work at the first professional production at Merrimack Repertory Theatre, but like you can't completely rewrite the whole opening 10 minutes in a 5-week rehearsal period and start like pulling apart again this gauntlet, this kind of thing, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. You just can't do that. So having that time, really led us to get, and like the Arizona version is basically the definitive. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, these guys can tell me, but I think it's pretty much like the definitive version of the show that, every subsequent production has been like based on. So
Yeah, and what was great is in addition to getting to like hone things in the script and itself, we also got to hone things like the costumes, the some of those transitions, the set, like because of COVID, we came up with this idea of like placing the piano up and away up on this like staircase, and it was like, oh well, that really came out of COVID precautions, but it ended up being perfect because it's like it's
yeah,
such
because
a
there was a version, right? Sorry, I'm interrupting, but
yeah.
there was a version originally, because we were the first show back after COVID. This was September, October 2021. And the show had originally been slated for a year before, which was like high COVID time. And there was talk about like doing a video version, a live version online or whatever. And at some stage, there was talk of like a version where Charissa and the pianist were always like 6 feet away from each other. They're like perfect COVID show, 2 people on stage, they don't have to interact. So like that was a whole thing. But as Chris was saying, that's kind of what led to the format we now have of having the pianist kind of raised up and further back,
Yeah.
which kind of worked
Yeah,
for
it's
what
very
it
cool for
was.
this piece, right? So it's like, oh yay, like we see them up there and they're still part of the world, but not, there's more space for me to play down in the, playing area. So it worked out great.
Yeah.
One other developmental piece that I'll just chime in on that happened between Merrimack and Arizona that is larger for all of us writers out there is Ed mentioned early on we said, can she sing a duet with herself? And that just became a fun writer challenge. It became a fun performer challenge. Every time the audiences saw that, people are like, that moment, because you're sort of waiting for it. If you know musicals, you're like, well, it's a love story, even though it's like friend love, but it's a love story. So like, where's my duet? That song kept moving places in the show.
Right.
It kept going somewhere else. And there were several points where it was on the chopping block. And I can remember myself, I know other people did it at other moments, but I just remember a couple particular moments where I was like, that song is not being cut from the show. It's good. It lands so much of what this show is about. It's about for the performer. It gives the audience this amazing experience where you're like, I kind of saw him and her do the dance moves
Well, because
together.
they dance as well together, right?
They
I don't
dance.
know if we mentioned that. They like to do all the. And so Charissa manages to do this with like, there's like a person missing, but she manages to be both of them.
But I think one of the big things for us as writers is like, sometimes there are those moments and like all the people around you will be saying that needs to go, but like, and I think trusting the audience is important. Hopefully you're writing a show because you want to bring something to them and not just torture them for, I mean, some people do want to do that and that's great.
That's their right.
That's the show you want to create, but holding to those things where you're like, this is good, and keeping them even when people might be saying, let's get rid of that. because now it's in this beautiful place in the show, and it took
Yeah.
probably 6 or 7 different iterations to get it to where it is now. But it's such a wonderful moment when it happens now, and the audience is ready for it. It surprises them. Charissa, the character, is ready for it. She's ready to celebrate and sing and dance with him. So one of my big lessons during that time was like how we advocate for the things we know are important in our works.
Yeah.
Because one of the pains, I think, of writing is that you put it down and then everyone takes it and is making it theirs.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, how you hold on to what's yours, I'm putting that in quotes because we're all collaborating.
Yeah, that's a really, really smart thing to say. And I was going to say, I think one of the things about the three of us as a writing team, just to speak to like the team as credit, is I think it took us a while, but like we really found the place of like really trusting each other creatively and finding out ways to like figure out when we're all united on what we think and when we're not, like thrashing those things through so that us as a team, it wasn't like one of us going to the director and whispering in his ear, we should do this, while the other person didn't know about it and things like that. We have very often disagreed, as collaborators do, in all kinds of ways. And that's healthy. And I think we all see that as a positive. I hope I'm not putting words in these guys' mouths, but I think, yeah, pretty early on, like learning that we were the writing unit, the kind of that was like a really important part of that, and like having these guys to kind of bounce ideas off to be like, what do we think about that? I think definitely, you know, eased that process. Because I'll just side note, this is an anecdote, not even about our show, but I heard a story in the original Little Mermaid. A ton of the executives wanted to get rid of part of your world for whatever reason, and that was a moment the writers were like, you can't do that. So I'm pretty sure that's true. I definitely read that somewhere, but just
It's
to be
in the
like,
Howard Ashman documentary. Yeah, they talk about
right.
that.
Okay, great. So I'm glad I knew I'd seen it somewhere. I was just like, whatever. But it's just like, you know, another of those examples of like, there are 1,000 different reasons to do anything in a theater piece sometimes. And sometimes the reason is just, this is a really great moment not to throw away. I know we're like taught, we think a lot about like efficiency and making sure everything has earned its place. And often that means like, does it do the work in the book? And that 90% of the time it is true. But sometimes there are also like, oh no, this really encapsulates, as Christian said, like what the show is on a kind of textural level or like format level. And it would be a shame to lose this, like what, you know, what that is.
Yeah. And I think that just that idea of trust your gut as the writer, know when
Yeah.
something should be there, even if you haven't just figured out up here what that means yet.
Well, and I was gonna say, because that's one of the whole things I just find with creative projects in general is just like so much. It's that like knowing when to trust your intuition, which is like, because so often like, and it was interesting with the second production. I can't think of a really good specific example, but there were tons of things I was like, oh, our intuitions were really smart on that. I didn't realize it at the time. I just couldn't like verbalize it or whatever. And it is, as Christian said, that like you're bringing all these people in and these people are smart and experienced and brilliant at what they do, and so you want to honor that because their perspective, you know, other people's perspectives, producers, directors, the assistant director, and the various people we've been involved in the show have like transformed what we've done as artists, as the like originating artists. But it is also that thing of like, we've been with the show even in, you know, 2021 doing the production in Arizona, we've been with the show 7 years. You know, some people have been with the show 3 or 4 years. Some people have been with the show a month or two, and it doesn't mean that their ideas are bad, but it is also like, you know, there's been so many versions, there's been so many conversations about things that you know you don't want to forget that as well. I think that is part of it. You know?
100%. Yeah. Oh, this has been such a lovely conversation, my friends. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
One quick little wrap up question, if that's all right. Just a little one, a little toss around. We can spin around the room again. Is because I find that something I talk with a lot of writers about is what do you do when you feel stuck for a moment? And just like where do you go to relight your creativity? And I'm just curious to hear if you have answers to that. Charissa, we'll start with you.
Oh boy, when I feel stuck. I feel like I have a lot of people in my life, like, Christian, my husband. I'll usually go to those people and like pose these things just to like bat ideas around. But I think when I feel like my creativity is really down, I usually look somewhere else. Because I've found that like, especially as a musical theater performer, like at least myself, this is my experience, for so long, it was like really my only thing and my like entire identity. And when I finally realized that that was like really unhealthy and not great for me, I feel like is when my life got better.
Yeah.
because because now it's like, well, if I am stuck or if this one particular thing isn't happening, there's so many other things in my life that are happening, and that bring me joy and where I can put my creativity, like gardening, remodeling my house, playing with my nephews, right? Like there's so many other outlets for that. Or I do taekwondo now is my big thing. I do a lot of taekwondo. And so um those things can really light that, right? I think if you go to other sources, sometimes that can really spark you. And then you come back to this thing and feel renewed instead of being like, right, if I just keep pounding my head against this same wall, it'll change, right? So that really works for me.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Ed, how about you?
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's kind of similar, actually. I think the thing for me is always like the hardest question for me is knowing when is it that I need to like try, and maybe that means like doing a like sketch or like not necessarily diving in and writing the thing, but thinking about it, doing some groundwork or whatever. When is it that? Although, when we talk about like little steps in creativity, you can't get exactly where you want to be, but you can do that little step to get yourself there. So sometimes it's that, but yes, sometimes it's just like you need to work on something else. You need to go to the gym. You need to decide this week you're not doing any creativity, or this month even you just brain is gonna. I feel like it's that kind of like, what's the phrase? Accept what you can't change and change what you can't accept, which is like a really, really great phrase. But like in practice, how do you know which is? That's
Yeah.
the like thing I think that is hardest. So it's sometimes a bit of trial and error, but it's like finding out, is this a moment that I just need to, Charissa and I are both Virgos. I don't know if you believe in all that stuff. I don't know if I believe in all that stuff, but we definitely both have the like, oh my God, 110%, like the way we get. Christian has this as well, and Christian's not a Virgo, but like, do
I'm
we need
not
to
like the
just
two of you though.
okay, that's fine. That's good to know. But like, it's good to hear you say that. But it is like, yeah, do we need to like grasp this more? Like, if we just work harder, will this make everything work out the way we want? Or is this a moment to step away and just go, this is a break moment, like Chris said, like the taekwondo moment, or the gym moment, or like a walk around the neighborhood,
Yeah.
or work on something else. So that's the thing. That's the thing I sort of struggle with most in that. But I think that's my answer, deciding which of the two. But like, that's my answer.
A beautiful answer. Thank you.
My
Christian,
pleasure.
what do you got?
Those are so good.
Word.
I have two things rattling around. I'll do two quick things. The first, this has been my practice for a long time, even as like a little fledgling creative. I call them cracker projects. Like, when you're like sampling and you're like, oh, let me sample that. It happens with wine, but it also happens with other foods. And then you don't eat that anymore, and you eat a cracker to cleanse your palate, right? And then you do another one. Or maybe you're like, oh, I want to go back to that first one. So I'll do a cracker project, especially with these big musicals where it's like, oh my God, there's so much. So it's like, let me go write a song completely unrelated. Let me write a piano meditation. Let me write a poem that is maybe a lyric or not. Let me write a 10-minute play, right? So something else that's completely unrelated that at least keeps the creative momentum going, even if it's not on that project. So if it's stuck on a project, I'm apt to like find a cracker project and make that happen.
Yeah.
If it's larger stuckedness, which I really experienced, it started just before COVID, and then once COVID hit, like really hit me, like life stalling stuckedness. um that was hard. I mean, part of that was just wading through and continuing on, but I think the biggest thing that shifted that for me, and this is what I might invite other creatives or artists who even aren't stuck to do, is I had a great therapist. Thank you, Peter. And I really looked at what theater was for me, which is not anything I'd done before. I mean, I knew things about what it was, but I really got like, why does this hurt so much? Why is it hurt so much that I can't move forward? And like clarifying what theater was doing for Christian as an identity, Charissa kind of hit what it was doing for my sense of self-worth, and clarifying that like whether someone does my show, picks me for their cast, puts me on their artist roster as an agent, I was taking it personally, tribally, because I was getting worth and community, which most of us in the theater get a sense of community from our work. But like, that's not the only place that exists. And so if you're feeling stuck in the larger industry, that would be my thought, is like, do some maybe of the hard inner game work about what theater means to you, because maybe there's an emotional hook that has you stuck. And if you can release yourself from that hook, maybe you can get back to creative flow, which is where we really want to be.
Wow. Wow, those were phenomenal answers, my friends. My goodness. I feel like you just gave a masterclass over the past hour, the three of you.
No.
So
Sweet.
thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and being here, talking about the show. It really is such a special show, and I want the world to know about it.
Thank
So
you
we will
for shouting
promote
it
this
out. I
video
appreciate
everywhere.
it.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Speaking of shouting it out, I will put the campaign link, obviously in the comments, but where else can people check out more information about the show?
They can find us at my80yearoldboyfriend.com. So we have a website there, and they'll be able to find press and some clips and
Yeah, tons of
all kinds
videos.
fun things on there, and we'll keep updating that. We've got some new great artwork that we've just acquired, and so we're going to probably do a whole revamp of that website, but that'll get them started for now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. You three, thank you to everyone who's been watching with us for being here. Obviously, this video will live on and the replay will be available, so I hope you come back and listen again. I know I will. There were a lot of phenomenal nuggets in here. So thank you all again for joining us. And until next time, cheers, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael.